everyone! I'm so excited to be here today for Yarnspirations to help show you how to make these fabulous rag wool mittens. My name is Anne Wheel. I write the blog Flax and Twine, where you'll find all sorts of projects and patterns for the modern maker. I'm also author of the book Knitting Without Needles and currently Weaving Within Reach. Look for those in your local bookstore. But today we're going to focus on making these great mittens, and I've done the pattern in two sizes, large and small, so you can have a his and hers. They're super easy. Don't be intimidated. They're much easier than you might think, and you're going to love having knit these. The materials you're going to need to make the mittens are 2 balls of Patton's Classic Wool Bulky, and I've done this in rag, which just means it's a twist of the cream and the dark gray, which I love. I love that kind of marled look that gives you. We need scissors and a darning needle. You need a little stitch holder to hold the thumb stitches when you get to that part. If you don't have one of these, you can easily substitute a couple of big safety pins if you want to do that. So you don't need that specially. But you want you may want a measuring tape, and you also will need actually 2 needle sizes because we make the ribbing on the bottom a little smaller so it snugs onto your wrist. So these are US 10 needles, that's 6mm needles. And then these are US size 10.5 needles or 6.5mm needles. Now we're gonna knit the mittens flat. So we're not gonna do it in a round, we don't need double pointed needles, but you also, because we're knitting it flat, you don't need circular needles either. You can use just straight needles if that's what you have. We knit these mittens flat, and then we will seam them up at the end. And I have a magic stitch that hides that seam so that you won't be able to see it. So that's all we need, but let's get started. I'm so excited for my mittens. So you'll see that this part here is just on a slightly tighter needle to give you that closer fit to then the rest of the mitten. So we start with our 6mm needles, or 10 size US 10 needles, and we're gonna do a long tail cast on. So you wanna leave about 1 yard just to be safe. I always like to leave more because I hate running out of yarn at the end when I'm casting on. You wanna start with a slip knot, so you bring that over, pull an end through, and if you want more details on how to cast on, you can go back to the original, to the scarf video, which is the first part in this series where I do this a little bit slower, or you can also go to Yarnspirations library and they have lots of tutorials for you to learn the basics. But for this pattern, we've got both a small and a large. So when you're reading the pattern, the first number that you'll see is the size small, and then the number that's in the brackets is the size large. So you'll either now be casting on 31 stitches or 37 stitches. Okay, we've cast on 31 stitches, and what we're gonna do is this mitten has a knit 1, purl 1 rib. But if you watched the hat video, which is part 2 of this series, you'll know that because we're knitting these flat, I like to include an extra knit stitch at the edge so that when you seam up this mitten ribbing, you can't tell where that ribbing, where that seam is. And to do that, we need this little extra stitch over here. So we're gonna actually, to do the 1x1 ribbing, we're gonna knit 2 stitches. And then we're gonna purl 1. And if you need more help with the knit and purl stitches, we reviewed it in part 1 and part 2, but you can also go to the Yarnspirations library and review those beginning stitches. But again, we knit, that's that extra border stitch, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and just do that all the way across. Okay, so we're coming to the end with our last purl on this initial row, and we're gonna spin it around, and you just keep going on the way back in your knit 1, purl 1, and you'll start to see, you can see the flat stitches or the bumpy stitches, which are the knits and the purls, which help kind of guide which stitch you do. And you can always follow the pattern as it's written. So in this case, on the way back, it's all knit 1, purl 1 until you get to the very end when we have to consider that last extra knit stitch that we're throwing in there for the seam. So that's why if you look at the directions for this row, it tells you to knit knit one, purl one until the last stitch, and then it tells you to purl one more stitch because that gives you that extra border stitch. Now what I want you to do is just keep going, where you just repeat these 2 rows over and over for the ribbing. For the size small, you want to do 10 total rows of the ribbing, and for the large, you want to do 12 total rows for the ribbing. So here we are coming to the end in our knit one, purl one, and here's, as it says in the directions, until the very last stitch, and then you purl that again because we have that little oddball thing at the beginning. Then you flip it over again and you repeat the same pattern where you knit one, you knit your little oddball, and then you go into the knit one, purl one pattern for the rest. And you want to do 10 rows total for the small mitten and 12 rows total for the large mitten. All right, I am knitting the small mittens, so I've done 10 rows of ribbing, and I usually count these by counting the V's of the stitches here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I know I've done 10 rows and I'm ready to transition into the body part of the mitten. So that's this part here. We're gonna change needles to a 7mm needle because it makes this fabric a little nicer and more relaxed compared to this smaller part that you want gripping your wrist. But the counterintuitive part is that this ribbing, the way the fabric works is it really pulls together. So if we just knit straight without decreasing some of these stitches, it would get really wide really fast and more wide than you want. So we're going to decrease stitches on this row. And if you're making the small mittens, you're going to want to decrease 5 stitches evenly across the row. And if you were making the large, you would want to decrease 6 stitches. But I'm going to walk you through how I spread that out in this pattern. And if you're making the large mitten, it's just the same. You just do the repeat one more time. So we're going to start with knitting 2 stitches, and then we're going to knit 2 together. So you just bring the needle under 2 stitches, bring 1 loop of working yarn around and through those 2 stitches. So we've decreased 1 there, and now we're going to knit 4. And then we just repeat that across the mitten. So you want to knit 2 together and then knit 4. Knit 2 together and then knit 4. Knit 2 together, knit 4. And here you'll do your last knit 2 together, and you basically have 3 stitches left over here. So now that we've done this decrease row, you want to just count your stitches and make sure you have the appropriate number left on your needle. So for the small, you want 26 stitches left. For the large, you will have repeated that decrease one more time, and you will have 31 stitches remaining on your needle. So now what we want to do is continue in stockinette stitch. So that's what this stitch is called, where it's smooth all the way across the fabric, where all you see are knit stitches. It's called stockinette. And in order to get stockinette, you knit on one side like we just did, and you're going to purl on this other side. So we're going to start on this side, and we're just going to purl all the way across. Okay, so that's actually all we need to do before we start the next part on the small mittens. If you're doing the large mittens, you would do 2 more rows. You would knit a row and purl a row. But since we're doing the small, we actually start the thumb shaping right now, which is hard to believe, but if you look at this pattern, you can see the thumb starts to increase right here, right from the bottom. So that's what we're gonna do. Now this pattern includes right-handed mittens and left-handed mittens because it's much more comfortable to have that thumb not coming directly from the side, but actually coming a little bit more from the palm. But what we wanna do is we're gonna start for the left thumb, which means it's a little bit on this side of center. We're gonna knit until just before the 12th stitch. We want to put this marker just before the 12th stitch. So let's just count and make sure. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, so I've knit the 12th stitch. So I'm going to go back one. And I'm going to put this stitch holder on here and use it as a stitch marker. I always manage to lose markers anyway, so I just find it easier to use the holder as a marker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the stitch, I'm going to just bring this yarn in front of the needle so it comes towards me. And you'll see that when I go to knit the next stitch, the 12th stitch, it brings this yarn up over the needle. So let me show you again. I've brought it to the front and I'm going to knit the next stitch. And as I bring this up, it comes up over the needle to wrap around this stitch the next stitch, the way I would normally knit. So when I bring that through, what happens is you have this little yarn over, it's called a yarn over right here. And you'll see that we'll find a way to make that turn into a regular looking stitch on the way back. So now we're going to increase on the other side of this 12th stitch. We're going to bring the yarn in front. We're going to knit the next stitch, which again brings that yarn over, and finish that. So you'll see it's like a regular stitch. This was stitch 11, yarn over, stitch 12, yarn over, stitch 13. Now, if you were doing the right hand mitten, you would do the same thing, but around stitch 15. In this case, that would be for the right hand mitten because you want your thumb further over here. But in this case, we're going to keep going. We're just going to knit around or knit across the rest of the row. Okay, so now I'm just going to purl across this row, but when I get to the increases, I'll show you my little trick for not having holes in your fabric from those increased stitches. So now we're just purling back across. So you see these two on the back. This is your 12th stitch here and then your yarn over. You want to bring your needle in between those two stitches and through the back leg of that yarn over. And that gives you this little cross here. And then you want to purl like you normally would. So it's called purling through the back leg. And we're going to purl through there. And when we do that, when we do the next stitch, it comes together. So it hides that increase. And then when you get to the next one, you want to do the same thing. You want to go through the back of the stitch, purl, and it'll help close that off. You want to slide that marker over so you know that's where the increase is. And then you want to keep purling across the whole row. So in between each increase, we're going to do the increases 4 times, but in between each one, we're going to just do 2 rows of stockinette. So we came across, did the increase, then we purled across and covered the holes. Now we're going to knit another row and purl another row. So you can see here, it is hidden fairly well, but you can see a little bit, there's a little bit of a hole there where we made our increase, but when the mitten is together, you don't really see it. So we had the increase row, the purl row, then 1 more knit roll, and 1 more purl row. So now we know we're back to the increase row. So because we increased 1 before, now we want to knit an increase before the 13th instead of the 12th. So we're going to knit 13 stitches here, but the marker will be right before the one that you're going to increase. And what you can do is I'll show you here. What will happen the whole mitten is there will be 1 center knit stitch that just makes it straight up, and that's what you're going to increase around each time. After 13 stitches, you want to bring the yarn forward, slide the stitch marker over, We're going to bring the yarn that had come forward over your right hand needle and around, and you knit a full stitch. And there you've got that center line of knit stitches, and you're increasing on either side of it. So now we're going to increase again by bringing our yarn forward. Then we're going to knit a stitch, and because our yarn's forward, it goes up over the needle, and we make a yarn over here, which increases the stitch. Now we're going to go across again. And then basically it's the same. You're going to purl on the way back, do stockinette for 2 rows, increase again. So you do that 4 times. So you want 4 rows of increases. And that's for either mitten. You're going to do 4 rows of increases. I'm on the way back from my last set of thumb increases. And the trick about this last increase is we don't do an extra 2 rows. We just come back with that purl row, and then we're going to set aside the thumb stitches. So here we are coming to the yarn overs, and then we're going to go straight into setting aside the thumb stitches. And I'm going to take this marker off for now because we don't need it anymore. I'm going to twist that last yarn over and finish my row. All right, so we finished our 4th increase, and you can see it right here. And this is the way I like to see where I want my thumb stitches to be. If you wanted to, you could have left the marker in here, but I'm just taking this out because I think it's better to see it. So if you pull this apart, you can see here's an increase, here's an increase, here's an increase, here's an increase. And this is that center row of stitches right up the middle of the thumb. And we've added 4 on each side. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this center one and 4 on this side and 4 on this side, and we're going to add those 9 stitches to a holder so that we can pull the fabric together for the rest of the mitten body. So I know that's the center stitch, and these are 4, so then this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 stitches here for me to knit before I get those stitches. And that'll vary if you're doing the large size or if you're doing the other thumb, that number of stitches that we're doing right here. But what won't vary is that center line. It'll just be shifted over if you're doing the other mitten. So I'm going to check, I've done my 11 stitches, but I'm just going to check one more time. I'm going to pull this apart. See, here's my center row. There are my increases, my last 2. So here's that center one. Now, not only am I going to pick up these 4, but I'm also going to pick up this strand here because this helps give you enough stitches for the thumb. So I'm going to pick up this strand that's in the middle of the stitches I just knit and the ones that are going to make up the thumb. So I've got that strand that's making 1 stitch, and then I'm going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the stitches from the body. So now I have 10 total, right? I have the made one, then the 9 stitches, which includes the center one and 4 on either side. And then I'm going to make 1 here. See this strand that goes between the thumb stitches and the body? I'm going to put that also on this holder. And I'm going to close this holder. And like I said, you can use safety pins for this too. You don't need this special tool. But now in all, I have 11 stitches, 2 made ones and the 9 increased stitches from the thumb. And what you do then is you bring the needles together, and you've knit these 11 stitches over here. We're going to go ahead and just continue knitting. And you want to pull this fairly tight together so there's not a big gap between the ones you knit before on one side of the thumb and the ones on the other side of the thumb. And we just keep knitting across here. Oops, I dropped one. Don't panic if you drop one. You just go down and pick it up. Keep knitting all the way across. So now we're gonna just do stockinette straight for those total number of rows, which means we're gonna purl on this side and knit on the other side. So the mitten now measures 10 inches from the beginning to the top here, right under the needle, which is the size I want for a small mitten. You know, if you're making a large mitten, you wanna go a little bit farther. We're gonna decrease over 2 rows. So it's got a pattern for how we do this. We spread out the decrease over the row. And so you wanna just follow along here as I do this. So we're gonna knit 2, and then we're gonna knit 2 together. And now we're gonna knit 4. Basically what the asterisk means is you wanna repeat from that asterisk. So the asterisk started with knit 4, knit 2 together, and we're gonna just do that until the last set of stitches. So knit 4, knit 2 together, knit 4, knit 2 together, knit 4, knit 2 together, and then we have 3 left. So it's until the last 3 stitches here. And we're just gonna knit these. Okay, so we've done our decrease, and you can check your number of stitches. You should have 21 stitches left if you're making the small, or 25 if you're making the large. And now we're just gonna purl across this whole row, and then we'll get to our decrease row on the other side. So here we just purl. Okay, so we've purled across that row, and now we're gonna have more of a major decrease here. We're gonna knit 2 together all the way across. And because we have an uneven number, we'll end up with 3 at the very end. But we're gonna do these in pairs. To knit 2 together again, you put the needle under both stitches and you do a regular stitch, so 2 stitches become 1. And do that, repeat that all the way across the row. Yay, we're almost done. So we have our stitches here. Now, if you had a straight needle, if you're doing this on a straight needle, you'll want to transfer these stitches over to the other straight needle. But for me, since I have these circular needles, I'm just going to slide it over to the other needle. And what that does is it allows me to have the working yarn here at the back. And I'm going to cut this. You want to cut about 1 yard in order to seam the mitten and close this top part. So I'm going to leave about 1 yard, and then I'm going to thread this onto my darning needle. Like that. And what you don't want to do is run this back this way through the stitch that the working yarn is making. You want to run it through this stitch over here on the other side. So that's why I have you transfer it to the other needle. But you're just going to run the darning needle through these last loops of stitches, just like this. And you can take those needles away and pull your darning needle through the mitten stitches. And you're going to tighten that down in a circle, just like a drawstring bag. All right, so now I've tightened that top down like a drawstring, and you can seam this up now if you want, but I tend to wait to do all my seaming at the end. So I'm going to set aside the length, the yard that I cut to finish this. I'm going to take my working yarn, and now we're going to finish knitting the thumb. So what you want to do is you want to take your needle and line it up with this side of the stitches on the holder. And we're gonna make sure you put that made stitch on. Don't drop that. Remember, we picked up that made stitch. Then we're gonna put the 9 center stitches on. We're gonna transfer these over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those are those center stitches, and then one more made stitch here at the edge. And if you drop this, you can just pick it up again. It's just that strand that connects the extra thumbs back to the body. Okay, so we have our 11 stitches for our thumb here, and we're going to rejoin the working yarn. Now if you remember, we have these picked up made stitches here on this end and this end, and you want to treat these similarly to the yarn overs, where we're going to knit through the back loop so we can kind of add that twist so we won't get a hole. So to knit through the back leg or loop of the stitch, you want to stick your knitting needle behind that front needle instead of in front, but we're doing the knit stitch and bringing it through that stitch, and that'll help keep it closed. Now we're going to knit across these next 9 stitches just like you normally would, until you get to that made stitch again. And this is row 1. All right, so now we've got these 11 stitches, and we're going to knit 7 more rows before we decrease for the top of the thumb. So this is 2. Okay, so once you've knit your 8 rows, now we're just going to draw these together the same way we did with the top, with knit 2 together across the thumb. We're going to put it under 2 stitches and make 1. We're going to do this all the way across, and again, because this is an odd number of stitches, we're going to knit 2 together across the row until the last 3 stitches. So there's the last 3, and we're just going to knit all 3 of these together. So you should have 5 stitches remaining, and you want to leave about 18 inches to draw the thumb together and have enough to seam the edge of the mitten, and the edge of the thumb. So we're going to put our darning needle on, and if you have straight needles, you want to transfer these stitches over to your other straight needle, but because I have the circular, I'm just moving them to the other side. My working yarn is coming out of the stitch over here. We're going to go through this one last. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to set aside our needles and draw this loop of yarn through and tighten it up just like a drawstring bag. And now we have our thumb. And now to match a stitch, what you want to do is you're going to go back and forth and collect stitches on either side. And we're doing this on the right side, and what happens is these sides basically kiss together and they draw the seam into the inside so you can't see it. So we're going to come over here, and you want to, the top is tricky because we've just done those decreases. So you want to pick up a stitch on the left, on the top side here of the thumb, and then come down here, pick up one down here, and you'll see when we get to the straight part of the thumb, it'll start to get more clear. So here, you've got this bar that comes in between the V's. That's what you want to get on this side, and then on this side, you want to do the same thing. Right there. You just go back and forth from side to side, and it will bring that seam into the middle of the thumb. So keep going on this thumb, going from side to side, and I'll come back when we're at the bottom and show you how to finish it off. Okay, so when you get to the bottom of the seam, it should look relatively seamless as it does here. It looks like it's just knit all the way around. It does get trickier as you get down to where the thumb meets the mitten, and you will end up likely with a little hole like this. And what you want to do is just go from side to side on the hole, which will be a little bit like going up the side of the mitten to bring this closed. So if you see, that kind of brings that hole together and looks relatively seamless. So once you get to the point where you can pull on that and it closes that up, then you can scoot your needle over one of the stitches and back down into the middle. And you can make sure that that has a seamless look there. And then what you want to do is come to the inside of your mitten. You want to trim both lengths, and just for good measure, I knot these. Helps keep that window closed a little bit. So after you've knotted that there, you want to thread those ends onto your needle, and you're going to follow some of these strands here up and down into the body of the mitten. And it doesn't need to be perfect because this is on the inside of the mitten. So you just kind of want to go up and down some of these bumps, and then repeat that with this other one. Okay, once your thumb is all set and your tails are all woven in, you definitely want to do that now as opposed to later because it's open, easier to get to. You want to rethread that top tail onto your needle, and we're going to just do the same exact thing that we did with the thumb with this side seam. We're going to go from one side. Again, it's a little harder up top because you've done some decreasing there. You should be able to pick up that bar on the top side, and then come over and pick it up here on the bottom side. And then you go to the top and you just repeat that, picking up that bar that's in between the V's all the way down. And if you have a lot of extra length here, you can trim your tail, and that might make faster work of it. So we're going up right here, right next to this set of knit stitches here, and then this extra one that we knit kind of curves around the edge, and we're going to go underneath or in between those two stitches. And then on this side, you just got the purl, so we're going to go pick up the purl stitches on this side, and we're going to try and match those one for one all the way down. All right, so here we are at the end, and we're going to have our tail from the beginning and our tail from the seam we just made. And what we want to do is roll this cuff over because we're going to seam these edges or these tails into the seam here that we just made. So this is what we just made, and all you want to do is just slide that needle up that seam and make sure it doesn't poke out the other side, and do that for both ends. And if you want to do the other mitten, you just do the same pattern, only you shift where the thumb is. So when you do the left-hand thumb, it's a little off-center to the right of the work. And if you want to do a right-hand mitten, it's a little off-center to the left of the work, because you want that thumb slid over a little bit for your palm. There you go. Happy making. Okay, everybody, I hope you had a great time making mittens, and I hope you realize that it's a lot easier than it looks. And once you get started making mittens, it's really hard to stop because there are all sorts of varieties you can do with them and add a lot to your winter wardrobe. So happy knitting, and I'm so glad you were here with me for this 3-part series. If you didn't see the hat and the scarf, make sure you go check them out.